Hello, and welcome to AP World History with Miss Muir.
Mr. Yarsowich.
The AP World History course is divided into 6 time periods of uneven length, the reason for which we will explore throughout the school year. Each period has 3 or 4 key concepts that express the content of the course, and Mr. Yarsowich and I have prepared a video for each key concept. We're going to ask you and expect you to watch the videos prior to class time in order to be prepared for the day's activities.
First key concept centers around the ideas of big geography and peopling of the Earth. Big geography encourages you to look at the physical rather than the political geography of the planet. So check out this video showing the entire globe done as a plane. I'm going to play that again because it's that cool. Right. The perspective of world history is the big picture. And one of the things about looking at history as a world historian is to see the human species as a species, especially at the beginnings in period 1, rather than competing states, groups, or empires. Those come later in time. Also, nation states change. They rise and fall, and boundaries change, borders change, but regions are fixed to geography, and that's what's most relevant in this class, is the world regions. Peopling of the Earth, there's a couple of key concepts here that you need to keep in mind. One, this is a process that took place over almost 100,000 years. You can see here that humans began, Homo sapiens that is, in East Africa, and spread and filled the African continent and into the Middle East about 100,000 years ago. The species is about 250,000 years old, so most of our time was spent just on the continent of Africa. And as we spread, a number of reasons for that. One had to do with fluctuations in the climate. As different areas became warmer or colder, people became able to move into them and survive there. The other important part is the lifestyle itself of hunting and foraging. It means that you can follow the herd. You don't have fixed settlements, so people could just, they naturally were on the move. Up here you can see the land bridge from Siberia to North America, peopling North America, and that's about 20,000 years ago. Within 100,000 years, we had gone to just about every continent on the planet, including some of the minor islands in the Pacific.
Okay, the Paleolithic Age refers to the Old Stone Age, and that is in specific contrast to the Neolithic Age, which we'll get to later on in a later video. So most of what we're going to talk about today happened during the Paleolithic Age, or Old Stone Age. On the screen what you see is a picture of an oryx, or what we would probably call today an ox, or the modern sort of bull ox figure. And this is a cave painting that was found in Lascaux, France. And it's an example of the Paleolithic artistic style. So even though the people were hunter and foragers, they still were capable of creating this very sophisticated artwork. The next slide, you'll see another example of a Paleolithic piece of art, which is a carving into the face of a rock, again of an oryx, which is sort of the ancestor of the modern ox.
And the fixation on the big game, too, that was the staple of their protein diet, at least. Mm-hmm. As humans moved, one key piece of technology, perhaps the most important for hunter-foragers, was fire and controlling the use of fire. As they went into colder climates, obviously you need fire for warmth. Fire for cooking your food. There's actually evolutionary nutritional reasons for why cooked food helped Homo sapiens evolve and develop. And there's a social aspect to it as well. If anyone's ever been on a camping trip with a campfire, you know exactly what that is. It's something just instinctual in us. So the use and control of fire was a key technology that shaped the course of human history in the Paleolithic era.
The Paleolithic Age, of course, we call it the Old Stone Age. I like to refer to it as the time of stones and bones because most of the tools and weapons that Paleolithic peoples had access to or used were made out of stones and bones. And sometimes they used stones to shape bones into effective weapons. What you see on the screen is an example of an arrowhead. That's probably the most sort of stereotypical or common Paleolithic tool. These arrowheads would have been used on arrows, and also most likely, as Mr. Yarswich mentioned earlier, that big game was important, and so they would have affixed these arrowheads onto spears to hunt big game. Um, in terms of different kinds of weapons, it sort of as hunter-foragers moved into different parts of the world, they encountered different climates that had different plants and different animals. So it makes sense, it goes to follow, that as humans reached different parts of the earth, that they developed different kinds of tools based on what kind of game they needed to hunt. The hunter-forager lifestyle is something that you need to be aware of because you're often going to be asked to compare the characteristics of hunter-forager groups to other groups such as pastoralists and people who actually farmed, which we'll get to later. But for the hunter-forager, we often use this word called kinship. It sounds fancy, but really it just means related by family, right? Your kin. So hunter-foragers typically traveled, because they were nomadic, in bands of 20 to 50 people at the most. Their economic structure really was shared by everyone in the group. Everyone of just about all ages contributed to what needed to be done. That doesn't mean everyone contributed equally or the same job. Jobs were typically defined by gender. For example, men doing the hunting, women doing the foraging, which incidentally made up the bulk of the diet, came from women foraging. And also, jobs were often divided by age. So people of a specific age group were expected to fulfill certain roles within their band. We typically saw in these bands very few children. It turns out when you're moving around all the time, it's a disadvantage to have more than one child at a time because you can't really carry them both or multiple children over long distances. So you saw very small individual family units within the wider kinship group. Also, hunter-foragers are typically what we would call egalitarian, which is a great word that you should know. That means that there were no defined social classes and no defined, established, permanent political structure. When decisions needed to be made, they tended to be made by the elders of the group as a group, with no one person having more power per se. Hunter-foragers did engage in trade with other groups that they encountered as they wandered about. What kinds of things did they trade? Things that they made themselves, like tools, weapons, clothing items, perhaps. They also exchanged ideas, and so knowledge maybe of surrounding areas, of where to find more access to food, that kind of thing. Also, perhaps knowledge of unfriendly peoples nearby. And then another thing they traded was people themselves, right? Remember we talked about hunter-foragers are a kinship group. That means they're all from the same family. And we all know what happens when people from the same family create more of the same family, right? We need to widen the gene pool. So often these hunter-forager groups would exchange daughters and sons in order to have access to sort of new blood and new genes.
Or if they got too large, if it was a
Right.
particularly large, splitting into two different groups, typically you're talking 25 to 50 individuals. This lifestyle was incredibly flexible, and as you saw on the map, this was the way of living that allowed people to go to every imaginable climate on the planet, except Antarctica. And this way of life was pervasive. The world was not empty prior to agriculture. The world was filled with people living just like this, and it sustained human species for well over 200,000 years. And there's very few hunter-foragers today, but we'll get to the reasons for that in our next video.